You and I have, our paths have crossed in several different places.
Oh, yeah.
But let's give me a brief history on how you got in the citrus business. When I talk to folks, there are some that grew up in it and some that migrated into it, some that married into it. So what was your, as a youngster, where did you?
Well, I was born in a grove down in Avon Park. That's where my folks were. And then that was during World War II. I was born in 1936. And so my grandfather had groves in Frostproof, and he and his two sisters had, you know, I don't know, maybe in the 20s, bought land, you know, real cheap, planted the trees themselves and all that. Mm-hmm. So my granddad and I were very close. And I guess probably that's where I got it from, you know, just he taking me with him all the time. And I never thought I would get so engrossed with it like what happened, you know, things just happen, you know. And when I went to South Africa, you know, because of Gilbert called me one day, and he and I were good friends. And he said, "Tom, I want you to go to South Africa for the international, what was it called? The International Citrus."
Was this a Society of Citriculture, or was this a nurseryman's deal?
No, this is citriculture.
Okay.
And anyway.
Now let me clarify this before we get, you were already in the citrus nursery business?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we're jumping ahead now. We've left the grandfather and you in the grove.
Yeah.
Let's don't go there. Let's go back to you and grandfather in the grove, and we'll get to the Gilbert story down the road.
Well, then, you know.
I mean, were you like a lot of these guys that you spent time in the grove as a young man hoeing trees and doing that, or did you just rode with your grandfather?
I didn't do a lot of that. He was a character, but anyway, I spent a lot of time with him because my dad was a worker and he didn't have time for me. My dad and I never did a thing together, ever. Didn't even fish or do anything. But my granddad and I did everything. And so whatever he did, that's what I liked.
So if he was in the grove, you were in the passenger seat.
That's right. And I saw some wild things, I'm telling you. But then I had a terrible time in school because I was so dyslexic. And of course, in those days, they didn't even know what the word was.
Yeah.
And so I finally was sent off to a school in North Carolina. I think it was maybe the 7th grade I started there, or 8th, I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. And anyway, my mother had decided that this school could help me. They didn't even know what the word was. All I did was, and we'd go into these, you know, we had a big study hall, and I'd sit there and look at all these words, and I just couldn't do it, you know. But if I did numbers and did it algebraically, I could do anything. But because of that, I had eyes. I saw things that other people didn't see. But I guess that was because of that. Mm-hmm. And so consequently, finally the last year up there, I knew I would never graduate. So I told the headmaster, I said, if you would just loan my roommate the truck and let him take me to the train station. He said, whoa, what are you talking about? I said, I'm going home. He said, you can't do that. And I said, well, I'm not going to argue with you, but if you don't see me tomorrow, you knew I was meaning what I said. So I know what he did. He called my folks. I'm sure he did, but he never told me. So then he says, okay, you can do it. Well, I got on the train, and of course, it stopped in Orlando. And who was standing there? Mother and Dad, you know. So I knew that he
let the cat out of the bag. Yeah.
So my mother said, there's a little school here that you can go to for the rest of this year. And it was only like 2 or 3 months. And then she hired this lady, and she started coming to the house every day, teaching me how to read. She took me back to the 3rd grade level. Now I'm 19 years old. And
Well, by then they determined that this was a reading difficulty. So
oh yeah,
yeah,
I was very dyslexic. Tommy is too. But anyway, that lady spent time with me for almost a whole year, and when she got through with me, I could read. I was so excited. I didn't realize. I told my mother, I said, I'm not as stupid as I thought I was. And so, anyway, she made me repeat the 12th grade. And luckily, I had not gone to that school, so I didn't know anybody. But here I am, 19 years old, going to the 12th grade. But I graduated. And then I'm thinking, well, I'm going down with my granddad and see if I can work with him. And my dad says, no, you're not going to do that. He takes me to the, what do you call it? Anyway, he took me to the naval recruit. And the guy was real nice about it. He said, I'm going to give you an opportunity here. He said, you can go for 4 years and then you're through with us. Or you can go for 2 years and then you'll be in the reserve for 6 years. I said, I'll take that. So anyway, to make a long story short, I ended up on an aircraft carrier, and I spent 2 years almost in Europe during that Suez crisis. You remember that? Mm-hmm. That was a joke, but anyway. So when I got out, my mother, bless her heart, she sends me to Clemson. I said, Mother, what in the world would you send me to Clemson for? She said, it's a good agriculture school. And I said, yeah, but they don't know an orange from a... So anyway, it was the first year that it was a non-military school. There were no women, no anything. The only thing was different was I guess whatever they had to wear and whatever it was gone. And so they're trying to now, turn it over to another kind of school. Well, I had just a terrible time. Nobody gave me any information. Nobody showed me what to do. I took something like over 20 some hours, way over my head. But I was so good in algebra that that's where I got my points. Everything else, I failed. Terrible. So I thought, now I'll show them. So I go home and I told them, I said, I'm not going back. Dad says, no, you got to go back and finish the year. So I go back, and after that I come home. And he said, well, what are your plans? And I said, well, I'm going to go to work for my granddad. I've got it all figured out. He said, no, you're not going to do that. And my dad and Ben Hill grew up together. We lived in Avon Park and he lived in Frostproof, but he and Dad were the same age. And of course, he was at, what would you call him at Florida Southern? He was the...
the ag professor there?
No, he was the one that they always pick somebody that's wealthy, and he's sort of, what do you call him, there at Florida Southern. Anyway, Dad calls him and tells him all about my situation. And he said, Ben Hill, don't you think he could help me and see if you can get this boy in there? Because I couldn't transfer.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, good, I know he won't get me in. 30 minutes later, he calls back and he said, he's in. And I thought, oh, God.
So now you're off to Florida Southern. Was Professor Lyle there or Professor Mack?
No, Professor Lyle.
Lyle, yeah.
Anyway, so Ben Hill says, I want to talk to him. Now, I know the man, but I don't know him. Mm-hmm. I'm just a kid.
Know of him, right?
Right. He chewed on me for at least 10 minutes. your dad and I are tired of this, and on and on, like he knew. He said, this is your last chance. So I went to Florida Southern, though, and I got in that citrus school, and it was just exactly what I needed. I made the dean's list, believe it or not. And I met my wife here, and she was ahead of me. When I got started, I didn't start school till I was 22. So, but she had just graduated, so we got married. And, then it was, I really got serious about everything, And the Sniveleys gave me a program where I could work in the afternoons, and they would let me work in the Grove, and I had to work for Jim, what was Jim's last name? Jim Griffith.
Oh, okay, Dr. Jim, yeah.
Yeah, he was my boss.
Oh.
And he had,
You've had an education already with Ben Hill and Jim
you
Griffith.
can't believe what he had me doing. Measuring trunk trees, and just all kind of stuff. But I really gave it all I had, and I really loved it. And my senior year, they bought me a brand new Jeep, but it was not like the Jeep you'd think. It was a straight stick, no air conditioning, no heater, no nothing. But I thought that was the biggest thing in the world.
Bare bones, yeah.
Yeah. And so I worked for them for about 6 years. And unfortunately, I learned what not to do. That family went through $50 million, and took them about 20 years to do it, but they finally went broke. And anyway, during all of this, while I'd already started a nursery on my own. And Gilbert and I had done some things together, and he had given me some ideas. And at that time, Gilbert wasn't doing these fruit so much as he was working for that Jewish guy there in Winter Haven. I forget what his name was. But Gilbert was his production manager.
Gilbert Bowen.
Yeah. And
Yep.
Gilbert and I spent a lot of time.
Right.
And I really learned a lot from him. I really did. And so one day he calls me, and he said they're going to have this big thing in South Africa, and it's the I can't remember.
International Society of Citriculture.
Something
like that.
Yeah.
Close enough.
Anyway, and so
But you had a nursery going now. You were in the nursery business. You were selling trees.
I was selling trees, and I was going to people that didn't know me, and I'm saying the only way I'm going to sell a tree is I got to get in my truck and go, and that's the way I did. I had a card with all what I had, and I'd pass those cards out, and I did that. I went all over the place.
Now this was a in the ground field nursery.
That's right.
Okay.
The old-fashioned way.
Yeah. So you and Franklin Ward and Bill Adams and Chris Blanton and all those guys in the nursery business.
That's right. That's the way I did it. Anyway, Gilbert called me one day and he said, "Tom, I want you to think about going over there with them." And I said, "I don't want to go with those eggheads. Why do you want me to go with them?" He said, "Well, because," he said, "I think you got some common sense." He said, "I want you to go over, and all I'm asking you to do is take notes and find out what's going on, because maybe they have something," because that was when the blight was giving us a fit, "and maybe you'll learn something." And I said, "Well, how long is it going to be?" And he said, "You'll be gone for about a month." And I said, "Oh."
Who's going to run the business?
Yeah. And then I talked to my wife, and I said, "I don't know how you're going to handle this." And she said, "Tom, you might not ever get another opportunity like this. You better take it." So I did. And I went over there, and it was outstanding. I mean, we stayed a whole month, and I learned so much. And I saw at the one experiment station, they had macadamia nuts, and they had some tubing laid out and these little jets underneath them. And so right away, nobody paid any attention to him, but I did. I saw this thing and I said, whoa, what's going on here? And so the engineer said, well, these are really not designed for citrus or anything. He said they're designed to keep the dust down from all this gold mining. And that's where, and he said, that's where I got the idea from. And he said, I'm just trying this to see if it works. And so I said, well, can I have one of them? So he did. He gave me one. And he gave me the address and who it was and so forth. So when I came back, it wasn't me, but somebody that was with us that had seen this, and we'd been talking about the jets, gave it to Dr.
Koo.
And he called me, and he said, can you get some more of these? I said, I don't know. I'll see. So I got a hold of these people in Cape Town where they were manufactured, and they sent me a bag of them free. And I had to put them together, and then I gave them to Dr. Koo. And Dr. Koo says, well, come out here, I want to show you something. So he takes me out to where the fireplace, the fire tower was there on I-4.
Yep.
And that particular thing was his thing on all the different kinds of ways to irrigate. I don't know what all he had. He had everything under the sun. He said, I have one row left that I haven't done anything with. Let's put two, one on either side of each tree. We won't say anything to anybody. Nobody will even know. And he said, let's just see what happens. So I go on my way, and I don't even think about it for probably 6 months. He calls me one day, and he said, it's time for you to come out here and take a look. So I go out. He said, I don't want you to look at the irrigation. I want you to look at the trees. What do you see on these trees? Well, the way he was watering and everything, it didn't matter what he was using. They were loaded with fruit. So he goes over to this one row. He said, you see any difference here? I said, well, I don't know how you did it, but I said, those trees are loaded with fruit. He said, but guess what? I use 97% less water. Well, when he said that, I said, wow. He said, now you're going to have to get off your butt, and we're going to have to start getting these growers to start thinking about this. I said, I don't know anything about irrigation. He said, he stayed on me, though. I'll tell you, he's something else. Now, I'll tell him you can't think that way. You've got to start doing it. He said, you go around and you see them selling your trees. You start he told me, he said, get a little piece and put it on a hose so you can do this. He had it all fixed out for me. And so that's how we got started.
Remarkable.
Yeah.
And you know, Dr. Koo was probably, did more relevant research probably than any other guy that I know of, that, you know, at least during years in my lifetime. Sure, there were people that were entomologists that helped us control bugs and so forth. But Bob and Paul Smith basically did the whole fertilizer program. Bulletin 536, you know, and then not only did Koo come up with all the nutrition, then Koo was the irrigation guy also.
Yeah.
And every time I have a meeting and Koo's there, you knew that you were going to go home with something you could use.
Yeah.
It wasn't just all theory. So
he stayed on me too. He would not let me off the hook.
He saw the potential.
He saw that I didn't.
But he wasn't in a position that he could commercialize this.
Well, here's the way he planned it. He said, first of all, I want you to get some growers to just look at it and see the possibilities. Well, all I had was this little thing that you plug to them. And I said, I don't know how that's going to convince them. But anyway, I did, and I finally got one person, and it was Travis Murphy over in Fort Pierce. I was selling him a lot of trees. And his boss was a Canadian, very, very wealthy. And Travis asked him if he would mind him doing one block just to see. So he said, I'll tell you what, you just take 15 acres out right here. And the only thing you've got is canals. And I'm thinking, how are they going to do that? You know, because that's going to stop those things up. Well, Travis is smart. He got some guy there in Fort Pierce that was making these PVC things that you stick down on a well that are full of sand, got slits in them. This guy was so good at it, he could tell you how much water were you using, and he would know exactly how many slits to do. So he and Travis made a deal, and they floated it on the canal. This is unreal.
The first micro sprinklers that were sucking water out of a canal.
Yeah. And I looked down there one day, and you know, it was it was probably about an 8-inch piece of PVC, and that was it. Slits all over it, and you see the fish as it was working. The fish would just swim right over it. It didn't suck them in or anything. I guess he had it figured out, you know. And he never had any trouble with stoppies. It was incredible.
And I need that on my irrigation at the house. It sucks everything up. So Travis was your first cooperator that got you going, and I bet you that the trees grew off and it was successful.
Oh yeah, his boss ended up doing almost that whole 1,300 acres.
Because all that grove was going to be flood irrigated, right? And so now you went to they didn't have to pump water around, move it from block to block and everything else.
No, because you had all the water in the canals. And you remember that they had a freeze right during that time too. And everybody at Lake Alfred said, do not turn on anything because we're going to have these winds.
Yeah, well, they remember '62 when people used overhead.
Yeah.
And thought the theory was great.
Yeah.
You put out water, when water freezes, it gives off heat, but the sprinklers were moving around so slow, the ice loads built up, it broke the trees down, and it was deadly. Yeah. But Travis ran them?
Well, he's the only one though. Everybody else didn't do it.
Yeah.
And so he ran them, and people started coming out there, and they just said, how in the hell did you do this? And he said, it didn't matter. He said, I'm right here on the ground. And he said, the water in this canal, I forget what he said. It wasn't, but maybe, what would you say, 70 degrees at the most or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was enough. And then I learned later on that it's not that, it's the amount of, what would you call it? The heat that comes from it.
The heat of fusion, when you freeze the water,
it
gives off 7,200 BTUs per gallon or something like that.
That's right.
And so that's where we're coming into it.
Yeah. And that got it started, and of course, I went to different installers, but they were not interested. They said, we can't make any money on something like this. And I said, well, whatever. But you know, as more and more people tried it, and now look.
So you were forced basically to get into the manufacturing business.
Well, the people out in South Africa, they got so greedy, and you couldn't depend on them for anything, and so finally I got a hold of this guy, this attorney in Orlando, and I talked to him about my situation, and he said, I've got a guy up here that can make those for you. And he said, the only problem is you're going to have to separate them and put them together and all that. So I tried that, and it was just too much. Man, you get a box of those things, it takes 10 or 15 people to put all those things together like that. So finally, I got to the point where I was getting really down about it, and I was in Lakeland, And you know these little things that they sell you a spot that you can have a little business in, you know. I went by this thing and I saw those machines in there making stuff. So I went in and I talked to this guy and I showed him the jet. I said, do you suppose you can make something like this? And he said, yeah, I think I could do that. And so anyway, I stayed with him and kept encouraging him. And finally, I realized that if I could get him organized and get him to quit doing these other things, I think we could do something. And so I bought a piece of property right next to the nursery, where the nursery is now, and where Mexijet is. There was a sign on the thing said for sale. I didn't have any money, but I took it and put it in the back of my car so nobody see it. I went around and got the money to buy the thing, so I bought it pretty cheap. It's only 10 acres. And then I built a steel building, the smallest I could do. And I got that guy to move his whole thing over there. I think it was 2 or 3 machines. And that's how we got started. And of course, we've expanded it since then.
I went down, I think, and got some stuff from a place in, maybe it was Avon Park, but it was one of these things where they take children with
Oh, yeah.
low, whatever the correct term
Yeah.
is, and they were doing, hand assembly work
Yeah.
for putting things together. But once you became successful, then the competition came, and you had others that started. But
Well, the thing we had going for us was I had a Vietnamese working in the nursery, and he was one that the church had encouraged me to take him. He couldn't speak any English, but he worked. We'd close up at 5 o'clock, and he'd stay out there till dark. He worked. I never saw anything like it. And his wife would come out there when nobody's around. Well, to make a long story short, he came by my office one day, and he saw I had 3 women back there putting these things together. He said, give me. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I do it. I said, no, you're working at the nursery. He said, no, we work at night. That guy took that thing home, and he came back the next morning at 7 o'clock and had every single one of them done. They're all put together perfect, and that started. And today, he's got 85 people in Polk County that put these together. The old folks that don't want to work, and they got a spot in their house. And he has 2 big trucks that come in there every morning. They load them up and they show them what to do. They bring them back the next morning and they're perfect. And he's been doing that for, it's incredible.
amazing.
Yeah.
What an amazing story. Well, this is, Tom, I'm a firm believer that God has a plan for everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes we just got to
Yeah.
figure out what it is. And it seems
Well,
like to me that he had a plan for you, and in spite of the fact that you bounced around, you finally,
I did too.
ended up with it.
And it got to the point where I wasn't even going to church or anything. And my wife finally told me, she said, Tom, you have got to back down and at least go to the church with me and these 3 kids because you need to be there. So okay. I was working 7 days a week.
Yeah, I know.
So
I'm surprised you're still here. Most people work themselves to death, literally.
Yeah. But this pastor was from Mississippi, just an outstanding young guy. He was just nothing extraordinary.
Good old boy.
Good old boy, and he liked to go hunting, so I took him hunting a couple of times. I told my wife, I said, I can't let him go out there with all those guys drinking beer and everything. Maybe I can go in the daytime, in the middle of the month, a week. So I took him out a little bit. But anyway, to make a long story short, he didn't push me, But I started listening to him, and the next thing I knew, I realized that I was missing something there. And so I had a terrible experience. We had this cold weather. It was bad, and it wiped me out, except for my seedlings. And I couldn't even meet my payroll, and I had to hide from my people. I couldn't even pay them. It was that bad. So, and I owed the bank some money. And Jack, that I bought this place from, Jack, what's his name?
Berry? Not Jack Berry.
Jack Berry.
Jack Berry?
Yeah, this was his place.
Oh, okay.
So he comes out there, and he's one of the board of directors, and he goes to the same church I was going to. And he said, Tom, well, what's the situation here? And I took him out and showed him the trees and how I had a lot of seedlings. And he said, I'm planting a lot of trees down in South Florida. And he said, I can take all of these trees. And so he said, I'll make you a deal. And so he gave me a little bit down. He's tight. He didn't give me much. But you know what he did, though, which was so outstanding? He said, do you understand what a Lawrence warehouse is? I said, I never heard of it. He said, a Lawrence warehouse is a building that you put your product in, and it has a lock on it. And the people that loan you the money on the product, as you take something out, you pay the people that you borrowed from. And he said, and if you want to put something back in, you still put it back in. But every time you take it out, you got to pay. So here's what I'm thinking. Let's do about an acre of fence and put potted trees in there. And every time you take a potted tree out, they're going to give you $1. And then every time you put one back in, and you just keep going back and forth and back and forth. And that was so smart because, and that guy would come out from Lawrence Warehouse once a month and count and make sure everything was working. And he kept saying to me, he said, I've been doing this for years. And he said, this is the most outlandish thing I've ever seen in my life. He said, Jack Berry has got the whereabouts, so we're going to do what he says. So, anyway, that's what got me back on my going. And then after that, Joe Race comes to me and says, Tom, our little nursery's not doing anything, and you seem to be doing better, and would you consider getting together with me and you and I go by this Glen St. Mary nursery? I said, good gosh, you mean the one there in Dundee? That thing has been there for years. So anyway, we got a chance to buy a piece of it, which we could do, and they carried the note for us. And so Joe and I started that, and then we expanded on out of that. And then I made a deal with Joe that he grow the trees, and I'll spend all the time selling the trees. One year, I sold 700,000 trees. 1 year. Now, that wasn't the beginning. I mean, down the road.
Yeah.
And my problem was, Joe was so carried away with hunting and fishing and doing what he liked to do that he was forever selling my contracts to somebody else and getting me in trouble.
Yeah.
And this went on, and I had a terrible time. So I finally told him that I'd like him to buy me out, so he did, and I'd spend my time with Microjet. Well,
But you still had the nursery going.
Yeah, I still had the nursery.
Now, you converted from, like everybody else, from field grown to greenhouse trees.
Well, that was just the beginning, and we were only doing seedlings. Mm-hmm. It wasn't required then. So everything was bug. And you talk about hard work. Good gracious. We had to have lots of labor to do it. but I was moving the trees, so that wasn't the problem. It was just Joe wouldn't pay attention and take care of our customers. They were constantly mad because he'd sold their trees to somebody else. Oh, I had a terrible time with him. But this Vietnamese, he stuck with us, and he started speaking English pretty well. He came to my office one day and he said, "Tom, now that you have sold out, I was wondering maybe if you would take that note and let me buy it." And I said, "Well, you'll have to talk to Joe. He's the one." So he goes, and of course, Tom had been working with Joe. So Joe said, "Yeah." Well, Tom starts paying me, and he paid me about $20,000. He comes in one day, and he gives me back my thing. And he says, "It's yours. I'm through." I said, "Tom, you've done such a good job. Why are you doing this?" He said, "I can't handle it anymore. Joe's just beyond me." He said, I said, "Well, what about the $20,000 I gave you?" He said, "You gave me." He said, "Don't worry about it. I don't care." He said, I've had it." I said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And he said, "Well, you need somebody to keep putting these jets together." And he said, "I've got a lot of old Vietnamese." And he said, "I would like to design something." And so he's the one that did it. And we can do, right now, today, we can still do 100,000 in a weekend. He puts it all together. Stake, everything. 85 of them. And they all have their little room in their house. Nobody knows where they live.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing.
And it's still going on. It's still working.
I want to shift gears just a little bit because you and I were involved with the Whitmore farm and John Attaway. Tell me that story. How did you and John get together? And
he just got a hold of me one day and asked me if I would be interested in getting on the board. I wasn't really interested at the time, but he coaxed me, and I went up there and I got to seeing what they're doing, so I got interested.
Yeah.
And then eventually he put me in charge of managing the money, which I wasn't really excited about that. But you know, John, how he does things, just there it is. You got to do it.
Yeah. For folks who might not be aware of the formal name was the Florida Citrus Research Foundation, but it was known as a Whitmore Foundation because Al Whitmore, who was with Production Credit, was the guy that kind of ramrodded and got this going. And what happened was that the industry came together and bought some land that they then leased to the U.S. Department of Agriculture to do field research in, primarily in the area of plant improvement. And so this is where a lot of the trees that the researchers developed were grown off and evaluated. The Department of Citrus got involved. They bought a little bit of land that they added to the foundation as well. But it was an entity that was kind of self-contained and that owned the land and managed it. And Tom was a treasurer for years. I was on the board, and the property is still there, still producing trees.
I think it was 250 acres there at one time.
It was a nice parcel on the Palatka River and everything else. And so, you know, a lot of the trees that the industry depended on or has depended upon are there. And in other words, others are coming along. We don't know whether this Donaldson that was somewhere embedded in all those will ever turn out to be anything worthwhile or not. But
interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and there were some good things there. But in order for that foundation to function, though, you had to have some volunteers, and Attaway became very interested in it. But Attaway was director of research for the Department of Citrus, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And so he got involved with that and was very much committed to it. John had two things, the farm and his weather data and books that he wrote and everything else.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think due to the commitment of growers on that board and what's going on, it still continues to to thrive and function. And Randy Driggers was
Yeah, I remember Randy.
the field farm manager for years and
He
years.
works for him still down in
And he went to Fort Pierce, and he retired a few years ago. Randy grew up in Wildwood, and he was a good old country boy.
Yeah, I liked him.
Lot of common sense, and did a great job evaluating at that. And the farm went through a number of things. I can remember early on they had herd heaters down there and ran pumps and tanks, and what a mess. Well, Tom, you and I have seen a lot, and what impresses me is that in all of this, you have continued to hang in there. You can't see it, folks, but we're here, and there's citrus all around us.
Yeah, there's 600 acres in here, and of it, there's about almost 400 acres in citrus. And then I have also, this is just something else that I've ran across, these hybrid oaks. And this guy talked me into it, so I planted them ourselves. I did 25 acres of them. They've been sitting out there now for, 10 years. You should see how big they are. This guy comes up the other day and buys every single one of them for $750 a piece. And I haven't had to fertilize them or do anything, I just let them grow.
You got the Midas touch, although you got to go broke 2 or 3 times to finally get to that point.
I never would believe, because I got to a point where I'm thinking, I'm stuck with these things. I'll never get rid of them. And all of a sudden, he comes out of the clear blue sky. So,
well, it's fascinating because once you kind of almost get sucked into this industry, this citrus, this growing trees and everything else, it just seems to get a hold of you, and some people just can't turn loose.
Well, it's like I told you before. I see things all the time, and I see opportunities. And I bought a grove down in Fort Pierce, and it was one of those Coca-Cola deals. And this guy was one of the executives. And I accidentally found out about him, so I called him, and he had 150 acres there. And he was so sick of Coca-Cola, and the way he said, boy, did I ever get stung on that thing. He said, just give me anything. I said, really? He said, well, would you give me 150? And I said, well, I don't have 150. That's all right. Can you give me 20? And I said, yeah, I'll give you 20. And he said, and you pay me the other whenever you can. So I took that thing and put the jets in it. And there was only, of the 150, there was 80 acres of hamlins there on sour. And the rest of it was bedded but never been planted.
A nurseryman's dream.
So, you know what I did?
Sock the trees in there. Were you like Chris Blanton? If you don't put at least 400 to the acre, you're not doing a good job.
But I stuck them in there, and I did the wrong thing because I thought that those limes would do real well down there because, it's almost, it's actually south of Fort Pierce. Well, would you believe I got the insurance company to loan me the money. I planted the trees. And I think when they were 2 years old, they were loaded with limes. And we had that one freeze down there, got down to 19 degrees. It petrified
everyone.
So I called him, I called him, the guy up in Orlando, I said, you need to come down here. And he said, oh, I hate to do this. I said, I want to just let you look at it. So he comes down there and he said, well, what do you want? And I said, well, you gave me 5 years of interest only, and this is the 5th year, and I want to just either give it back to you or do something different. Oh, no, you can't give it back to me. And I said, well, you got to do something. So he said, I'll make a phone call. He calls me back 2 days later, and he said, you got another 5 years of interest only. I said, I can't believe this. So I went back and put red grapefruit on Cleo because of the soil there was so high in calcium. And you know, Cleo's the only thing that you can really, so I did. I had some beautiful trees there. Gilbert Bowen's brother-in-law, he came down there one day and he saw all the fruit on there, and he looked at that thing and he said, "Would you sell it to me?" And I said, "Well, I guess I would. Anything I got, I guess." He said, "Well, what do you think you want?" And I said, "I don't know." He said, "Would you take $2 million for it?" I said, "What?" He gave me $2 million. So here I am now. I've never seen this much money in my life. He gave me $2 million, and I talked to my attorney. He said, "Tom, are you familiar with tax-free exchanges?" I said, "What's that?" He said, "You do not touch the money, and we give it to another attorney to hold. You go find something else, and that way you don't pay any tax on it, and go to the next one."
No capital gains at all, yep.
Oh, that got me so excited. So I went over to, I guess it was close to Parrish, and I bought 400 acres over there for the same amount of money, and there was 300 acres of grove in there. All had wells and everything in it. And because it belonged to the French that have all that stuff over there. What's the name of the big French company over there that has all the? I can't remember anyway. I made a deal with them, and they finally sold it to me for exactly the same amount of money. I kept it for 5 years. Had a good contract with Coca-Cola. All of a sudden, this lady comes into me one day and says, "My boss has just sold his company in Tampa, and this grove is real close, and he's always wanted citrus, and would you be interested in selling this?" And I said, "Well, who's going to take care of it?" And she says, "Well, we'll take care of that. We just want to know if you'll sell it." So I'm thinking, you know what, I need to use my head now and not go too far off on this thing. So she says, "How much do you want for it?" I said, "Well, really, with the fruit and everything, I've just picked the fruit." I said, "If you could give me $3 million, she said, "Oh, that's nothing." She gave me the $3 million. So I went back to the attorney. I said, "What am I going to do now?" He said, "Leave it alone. Go find something else." I found this. It took this and three other groves to make the money go. And I still have not paid any tax on it. And I'm not about to get rid of this thing. I love it. You know.
Well, that's something else. You know, here you are, you're miles from civilization.
Yeah.
And you seem to just be thrilled that this is, you and the sandhill cranes were coming up here. And so,
You used to see the turkeys that come out there. See there?
Yep.
I throw it out there, the corn. The turkeys come out, sometimes the deer.
Well, I have a problem. I have an unusual situation. My wife was in the dairy business up in Lake County, and her dairy was in the Wekiva Basin, area of critical concern. What happened was that the environmentalists prevailed upon the state of Florida to buy the dairy to keep it from being developed, but they let her purchase the farmhouse. Oh. And so we have an acre, she has an acre, in the middle of an 800-acre forest. And I'm trying to feed the deer, and they just don't seem to be coming to my feeder. So a couple nights ago, I look out there, that's why they're not coming to my feeder. Here's this big black bear out there just gobbling up all the feed. So
he came over here one day and tore up everything.
Oh,
I haven't seen him since.
He tore my chicken coop up.
Yeah.
got my ladies really, and you think electric fence would stop a bear? I don't know.
No, I don't think so.
It doesn't seem logical, does it? Well, Tom, we could go on, and
Yeah, it's just amazing how things have worked out for me, because when I became a believer, things changed. God just engineered so many of my circumstances that I was not prepared for, you know. I mean, I could tell that He says, if you continue on and do like I show you, and that's the way it's been, you know.
well, it's a wonderful ride, and it's not over.
Yeah.
You're still enjoying it. Tom has to tolerate going to the beach in the New Smyrna condo once in a while, but this is paradise for him. I can tell. He escapes out here. He's in the middle of the green swamp and growing citrus.
We got 6 miles of canals in here. Back then, when he did that, that was probably in the early, I would say in the early, maybe the early 50s. He bought this thing. This is one of the first crews he bought. He had a drag line out here for 2 years just drinking. But of course, in those days, you didn't have to have a permit.
No.
Today,
It takes you 2 years to get a permit.
oh yeah,
and you
they
have to-
finally came out here one day. They finally said, we've always wanted to come out here. And they rode the whole place, and they just shook their head. They said, you look at the cypress trees, and you look at the watermarks, and he said, that tells you what's working. And he said, whoever did this certainly knew what they were doing. He said, I would never touch this, leave it just like it is. So that's where we've done it. And we got lots of fish and that kind of thing.
Beautiful place.
Yeah.
Beautiful place.
I love it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. We'll have to get together and talk again. We come back out here. So